morning, everyone. Welcome to Urban Development Network webinar number 5, where this morning we're going to be focusing on funding and finance. My name is Eddie Adams. I'm the moderator of this session today. Together with my colleague Sally Nishaw, we'll be guiding you through some really interesting presentations. Also, we'll be generating discussion from amongst the audience and with our expert speakers. Let me just say a few words about these webinars. The webinars are linked to the EC, the European Commission's Handbook on Sustainable Urban Development. The purpose of the Handbook is to deepen knowledge, to build capacity, to help share experience of good practice, to share examples of what works. It's also linked to the Urban Development Network, which is one of the capacity building mechanisms for cities across Europe, which is supported by the European Commission, DG Regio. Each of these workshops links to webinars links to one of the chapters in the handbook. Today's focus on funding and finance picks up on 3 of the sub-themes in that handbook. They are integrating EU funds with domestic funds, also looking at how we widen the funding, the financial partnerships, including involving private investors and the NGO sector. We'll also be having a look at financial innovation, the use of financial instruments, new financial products, and you see on the screen the 3 city inputs we'll have today, and we'll say a little bit more about the agenda shortly. This is one of these sessions, though, where not all of the expertise is at the top of the room or the virtual room. We know that in our audience today we're going to have people who are also very knowledgeable about the things we'll be talking about this morning. So we want to bring you into the conversation. We're going to do that in 2 ways. First of all, we have the chat bar, which you can see at the side of your screen. Feel free to jump into the chat bar with comments, questions, suggestions, links that you want to share. If you do that, please remember to go down to the bottom and push everyone instead of all attendees, because confusingly on WebEx, you have to push the everyone button or it disappears down a hole and we don't all see it. So we're also learning as we go along in these sessions. And the other thing we'll be doing is bringing you in with some polls. Sally will be running us 2 sets of polls, which we'll be using to get your thoughts on how things are going generally, but also to get your take on some of the topics we'll be discussing this morning. So we've also got a few technical tips to share about the connection. So if you've been with us in earlier sessions, we'll know we've had a bit of a bumpy ride in terms of the technology. Fingers crossed today that we have a better set of connections, but we are ready on hand to help if you have a problem. There's a few basic things which we'll set out in the chat bar, which you might want to think about if you do have a hiccup. But we'll keep an eye on that, and hopefully we'll have a smooth session this morning. Let's have a look at the agenda for today's session. We can just have a look at that now on the screen. So first of all, we're going to have Martina Pertoldi from the JRC and Nikos Karadimitriou, who is an associate professor at UCL in London. They were both involved as authors in the chapter on finance and funding. So they're going to set the scene for us at the beginning of our session. As I mentioned earlier, Sally's then going to go out to you with some poll questions just to check our levels of knowledge and understanding. And I mean, what I would say is this is potentially quite a technical conversation, and we want to make it as transparent as possible. We've got a jargon buster thumbs up. If someone uses an acronym or a piece of jargon you don't understand, then jump in and let us know, because this is about demystifying some of these technical issues. We don't want to get involved in a very kind of jargonistic conversation. So that's been our brief to our speakers. You can help us with that too this morning. And then let's just say a bit about our inputs. So the first presentation is from Yanis Mobilise, who's the Vice President of the Green Fund in Athens. Yanis is going to be talking to us about how the City of Athens combined EU funding and other sources of funding from the European Investment Bank, for example, in its 2020 investment programme. We're then going to have an input from Adam Abdul Wahab. And you have a problem with Adam this morning, because I'm Eddie Adams, and you will get jumbled up there. So Adam is from DG Regio, working on the financial side. Adam's going to share a couple of headlines with us about what's there in the new regulations that we might want to be aware of. We're then going to bring in Gwendolyn Carpenter from the European Investment Bank. Gwendolyn's role is a rapporteur. She has an active listening role in this morning's session. And we'll be asking Gwendolyn for feedback, for some key messages, and also we'll bring her in at the end just for some reflections on what she's picking up from the presentations and from the audience. We'll then take a short break. After the break, Jordan Guardo Vasquez from City of Bilbao is going to share with us the Bilbao story, and particularly the Bilbao story is very well known, but looking at it from the angle of how the investment package supported the urban transformation which is taking place in that city. So that's looking at the mix of public and private sector partners. It's looking at how they've combined the cohesion policy with the sectoral specialisation agenda. So again, a really great presentation. I'm really looking forward to hearing that. And then our third city input today is from Gothenburg in Sweden, talking about financial innovation. In Gothenburg, they've been doing this since 2013 with green bonds. So I guess it signals the fact that we're all in different places across Europe. We're in different situations. It's a diverse continent. So what is innovative in one place is maybe not innovative somewhere else. But we have Sarah Pettersson and Frederick Block from the city of Gothenburg who will be talking us through their use of green bonds and their approach to some of the financial innovation and new financial products. We'll then come back to Gwendolyn again. We'll then bring Commission input in the final session too, possibly. And then we'll have a little chance right at the end of this morning to look ahead to what's coming down the tracks in the new programming period. So that's our session in a nutshell. I'm going to ask my colleague Sally just to maybe open the first set of polls, and we'll come out to you with some questions. Hi there, Sally. Good to see you. And let's jump into the polls now.
Hi. Good morning, Eddie. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. Welcome to this 5th webinar in a series of 6. It's really nice to see the greetings in the chat from across Europe. We've got a really diverse representation from Seville, Freiburg, Sardinia. So continue to tell us where you're joining from. It's really nice to know that we're coming together across the European Union to look at this issue of funding and finance and money. Basically, we're talking about money this morning, how to find investment and find the right investments for your city. So looking forward to those contributions that Ed just lined up for us there. My role as co-moderator is to support the sessions this morning, and especially to support dialogue and conversation from all of us, hearing your questions, your comments, and your experiences that would be really valuable to bring into this conversation. So please do feel free to put your questions, comments in the chat, as Ed just said, making sure it goes to everyone. You can put questions to someone in particular when you hear the speakers talk, or just general comments. We'd also like to hear your experience. If you have got your own experiences of combining funds, of EU funds, of financial innovation, it's useful for us to pick up intelligence that way too. We'll bring those questions and comments in the chat into the conversation in the plenary at various intervals, and see what our rapporteur and our experts have to say. And maybe we'll also ask speakers to keep an eye on the chat and respond directly to you as well. So that's how it's going to work with the dialogue this morning. But the first thing we're going to do is have a quick poll to find out who's in the room. So could I ask Vasily to put the first poll question up, please? So
yes, let's start.
Thank you, Vasily. First of all, we want to know, is this your first UDN webinar in this series? This is number 5, so you may have already joined before. So could you quickly just answer yes or no in the poll on the right-hand side of your screen? So we know if we've got newcomers, or if we've got people who've been joining in the whole series, or different, maybe 1 or 2 webinars out of the previous ones. So just quickly engage with that poll and tell us yes or no, easy answer, just quickly tick that. How are we doing, Vasily? How are the responses?
We have 80 responses.
Just a few more then, because we have quite lots of board panelists too. Please tell us if you've been here before. Some we know have, some haven't. So let's give another 10 seconds and then we'll close that poll and see what the rate is of yes and no. Okay, could we have the results, please, Vasily?
Let's wait for the 10 seconds.
Okay, we're closing the poll now, so hope you've voted. Let's see what it says. We've got a good morning from Barcelona there. Nice to have you on board. Okay, so we've got most people are new to the webinar series. That's interesting. So the majority of people on board today have not joined one of the previous sessions. So it's a good to tell you at this point, even if you weren't here live in those sessions, you could benefit from them because they've all been recorded. So you can find the presentations and the recordings of the UDN series on the website, and we'll put that put the link in the chat shortly so you can benefit from those, even if you missed them live. So can we go to the second poll, please, Vasily? This is about finding out who you represent today. So what kind of organisation do you work for or are you representing during the session this morning? Is it a managing authority of an operational programme or an intermediate body that designs and implements EU funds? Are you from a national level, a ministry or an agency? Do you represent a city, a municipality, local government? Or D is regional government. We may have some regional government people on board. And you might be from a university or a research body, from an NGO, from the private sector. And we put other, in case we haven't got your type of organisation on the list. Please feel free to tick other, but tell us in the chat who you're representing today. That's really useful to know. Gosh, we've got somebody from Brazil just joined. Nice to meet you from Brazil as well. That's great. So please tick one of those, which one you represent today. Let's see who we've got in the room. Vasily, how are we doing on the poll now? How are the responses?
We have about 85 responses, so we have the last 4 seconds now.
Okay, 4 seconds, please. Those who haven't engaged with the poll, just tick one of those. Tell us where you're working, who you're working for. Okay, so we have the biggest group is from cities. Probably not surprisingly, this is about investment in cities. Also from managing authorities, quite a significant group. So people who are running operational programs, but also cities too. And then small numbers coming from the private sector, from managing authorities and NGOs. We've also got an international consultant on board. Somebody just told us there from other. That's great, good to know. So our speakers can get a sense of who they're speaking to in terms of their experience, how it relates to your work in the real world. So let's have a last poll, please, Vasily. We're going to have a last poll, then we're going to jump into the content. This poll is really gauging what your level of knowledge and experience is. These are anonymous, so we're not going to know who said which, but could you tell us which of these best describes your role? So the A is, I'm a financial expert, I'm very comfortable with numbers and financial terminology. B, you're not a specialist, but you have a reasonably good understanding of funding and finance mechanisms. C is, you're much more comfortable leaving financial and funding to others, so coming at this as somebody who's not working on it directly. And D, I think I might be in the wrong webinar, but this all sounds familiar and not familiar to you. So just quickly tick one of those, and it tells us the level of the audience, your threshold knowledge that you're bringing to this session today. How are we doing, Vasily?
We're fine. We have 85 finished answers by now, and we have about 30 seconds more.
Okay, so let's get a few more answers there. Please just tick and let us know. It's really helpful for us to know your level of knowledge as we go into this, so the speakers can pitch this right. As Eddie said, it's quite a technical subject potentially, and one of my jobs as co-moderator, I will try and pick up any acronyms or jargon and put in the chat what they are, if I know, because I'm not a financial specialist. But let's make sure this is accessible to everybody. The whole point of these webinars is to help people understand which might be the right tools for them, how they work. So we want to make sure that it's easily understood by everyone. Okay, Vasily, can we close that poll and see what the responses are? Okay, the vast majority of people are in that second level, which is not a financial specialist, but reasonably comfortable with the knowledge, the vocabulary, the mechanisms. That's good to know. We've got 7 people who are experts on board. I'm hoping that's the panelists, probably, and also some people who are more comfortable leaving this to others. But it's really good that you're on board, because the more you understand about these mechanisms, the easier it is to collaborate with people who are operating them and to understand how they might be used in your city and your investment strategy. So thanks so much for engaging in those polls already. I'm going to hand back to Eddie, and we'll be back later for some more thematic polling. Please keep your comments, your greetings coming in the chat. Over to you, Ed, for now.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Sally. It's really interesting to see that almost virtually 60% of you are joining us for the first time. So, you know, maybe you come specifically because you're interested in this theme. So that's useful for us to know, especially because I'm just going to introduce our first speaker this morning, Martina Pertoldi, who's based with the Joint Research Center in Seville in Spain. And Martina's been involved in writing this chapter, and you're joining us this morning, Martina. You're going to just tell us a little bit about the handbook, a bit about the JRC's role, mention the UDN, just as by way of background and context for, especially for those of us who are joining for the first time this morning. So nice to see you, Martina. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Ed. Good morning to everyone. Can you see my screen? Perfect. Well, my role today will be to provide you a short overview of the Handbook of Sustainable Urban Development Strategies, around which this webinar series has been built. The webinar series is organized by the Urban Development Network, indeed, to disseminate the Handbook of Sustainable Urban Development Strategies, published at the beginning of this year by the Joint Research Center, which I represent, in collaboration with DG Regio. And another aim for this webinar series is indeed to facilitate policy learning. We'll share experiences on what we think are good cases to learn from. And finally, we also want to get new input to improve the methodological support the JRC and the DG Regio can provide you. And for example, at the end of this webinar series, after the last workshop, the last webinar, next week, you will receive a survey where you can also provide input. You can provide suggestions on cases of SUD strategies that you think could be interesting for us and for others to learn from. The handbook is a specific resource, and I have here summarized the main features. What it is. The handbook helps to design and implement integrated urban strategies. And in fact, our aim was to operationalize the EU integrated approach to urban development that has been refined along the years. For example, we see it very much connected to the launch of the new Leipzig Charter at the end of this month. The handbook doesn't address urban development, generally speaking. It addresses a specific measure for sustainable urban development, SUD, as it is supported by the European Regional Development Fund, also in combination with other funds, which is quite relevant for this webinar. In this programming period, in the next one. It targets local authorities, like cities, but also managing authorities. In fact, we think that it's important to address different kinds of policy communities. In fact, managing authorities like regional or national governments are key because they are the ones responsible to set the rules of the game that other actors can play. And finally, with the handbook, we also acknowledge the fact that we need to involve practitioners and other relevant stakeholders, because it is true that urban development is steered very much by the public sector. We cannot rely only on the public sector to succeed. And this is also very relevant for this webinar, where we speak about funding and financing your strategies. Finally, the handbook is now online. It's part of a larger Knowledge for Policy platform hosted under the Urban Data Platform Plus and managed by the JRC. On the Urban Data Platform Plus, you will find different resources and tools. And in particular, there is a direct link to Stratboard, our urban and territorial strategy dashboard, where you will be able to find the largest data set of SUD strategies now available across Europe, with many data where you can with which you can play with. Also, with the handbook online, we have made ready for use the large amount of knowledge, data, resources, tools that you can find in the handbook. And we also provide new content. On the web page of the handbook, you will find not only the full report, but you also find the new executive summary, a presentation, a very detailed presentation on how the handbook works, and of course, the different parts, the 6 building blocks that constitute the handbook. And in particular, today we'll explore the funding and finance chapter. Also, we plan a future upgrade with more digital contents, including new tools and strategy examples. And also for that, I invite you to share with us any suggestion you have on interesting cases. Finally, I close inviting you to visit the handbook and to contact us. And preferably, I would like you to visit the handbook webpage just after this webinar, where we are going to discuss funding and finance with many interesting cases. So this is all on my side. I give you the floor, Ed. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Martina. Thanks for setting the scene for us, especially for those who are joining us for the first time today. And let's keep moving along. Let's invite Nikos Karadimitriou, who is one of the main authors of the chapter in the handbook on funding and finance. While Nikos is about to share his slides on the screen, let me just remind you that Nikos is based between Athens and London. Normally, in his day job, he'll be at UCL as Associate Professor of Planning, but like many of us, has been stuck somewhere else and has been in Athens for the past few months. So Nikos, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Thank you for making it. I'm Nikos Karadimitriou, and I was a co-author of the section on funding and finance, together with Carlotta Fioretti from the JRC. Next slide, please. The chapter deals with funding and finance for sustainable urban development, and the main rationale driving this chapter is, of course, that the range of funding and finance sources which have to be deployed will be deployed in this way in order to deal with a series of interrelated issues comprising sustainable urban development. So to be able to deal with those issues and to channel those resources to specific projects, we have to think of which resources are most suitable and therefore have a most effective use of those resources. Next slide, please. The combination of multiple sources is indeed an issue, and this is why it has a prominent place in the chapter as well. Exactly because so far only 21% of urban strategies actually integrate more than one funds, and overall strategies are rather small. 39% of the strategies for which there are data are small, less than 5 million size. So really to tackle the breadth and the scale of the issues, the urban issues at hand, bigger programs are needed, and various funding sources can contribute to making these programs much more effective. Next slide. So the three main issues which the section deals with the integration of ESI funds between them and with domestic funding, the involvement of private investors and the third sector in sustainable urban development, and the enhanced use of financial instruments and other financial products in integrated sustainable urban development. Next slide. The first issue, next slide. The first issue then, the integration of ESI funds between them and with domestic funding, really has to do with the diversity of priorities, targets and requirements that these funds have between them, and therefore finding ways to combine them, which will allow, as I said, programs to become more integrated in financial terms and to deal with a complex array of issues at the local scale. The next slide. The chapter comes up with various recommendations. I select the 4 ones that I think are most key in this respect. The first one is that the design of the strategies themselves would have to accommodate such integration of different ESI funds, and this can be done by reflecting EU policy priorities in those strategies. Secondly, for local authorities to consider whether having a strategic funding unit would be a suitable mechanism for, in the context of each local authority, of course. And this could also enhance integration of funding and, of course, better perspective into the available sources. And, of course, a lot of synergies can happen at the local scale. And by that I mean not only at the city level, but also even at regional and national level. In the sense that there could be enhanced coordination efforts or regulatory adjustments which would greatly facilitate this integration of ESI funds between them under the umbrella of one sustainable strategy. The chapter has several examples of how this was done in various locations. Each country is different, of course. So please refer to that, and you might be able to find something which is more relevant to yourselves. Next slide. The second issue, which is involving private investors and the third sector in sustainable urban development, has to do more with how we can manage risks and how we can use these strategies to really make the investment program an attractive investment proposal for the private sector and for the third sector. Next slide. The key recommendations are to include potentially bankable projects in the sustainable urban development strategy, and this really means developing a pipeline of projects within the urban authority or within the area which the sustainable urban strategy will cover, and really filter that through a sustainable strategy, and not expect projects to really mature within the very, very short timeline that is available once the calls come out, for example. Yeah. This and combined with building up know-how, trust, long-term relationships with investors, and with organizing an investment program or using a sustainable urban strategy to organize an investment program for a specific area would really reduce political risk, reduce planning risk, and effectively reduce investment risk for the private sector actors who wish to be involved. Next slide. Finally, the third issue is how to enhance the use of financial instruments and financial products. Next slide. And The chapter deals with the rationale behind this promotion of financial instruments, the role of the EIB, and how specifically local authorities could bring those financial instruments and products into a sustainable urban development strategy funding mix. Next slide. Next slide, please. I think we have to go one before. Yes, thank you. So the key recommendations then, insofar as these key issues are concerned, are that the use of financial instruments, of course, is key in increasing effectiveness. It's the point I started the presentation with. Really, the impact of ESI funding, urban development, can multiply in effectiveness when combined with these other instruments and products. There is a lot of technical assistance available for urban authorities who wish to actually bring it to the mix. This is available both from the managing authorities, but from the EIB as well. The European Investment Advisory Hub is, I think, the first go-to location for those of you who wish to have a tailor-made technical and financial advice. And of course, the investment platforms format, which can be used to diversify risk and reduce overheads and really make perhaps smaller local authorities or more diverse programs eligible under the InvestEU initiative. Yeah? And finally, don't limit yourselves. Explore innovative tools. Explore. There's a great wealth of financial products out there, and one of the presentations that will follow is about investment. Is about green bonds actually, and how this innovative instrument can actually serve your strategies. Next slide. So we have 3 city cases, Bilbao, Athens, and Gothenburg, and those 3 cases highlight different aspects of the contents of this chapter. Bilbao used multiple funding sources to serve the city's long-term strategy. Athens used and pioneered the investment program approach, and Gothenburg used innovative financial products, the green bonds in particular, to actually boost its strategy. Next slide. So thank you very much for your time. If you wish to email myself or Carlota, here's our email, and of course, take it download the address provided. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Nikos. Sorry, the sound was a little bit low there. I think it got better towards the end, but hopefully, people captured that interesting and useful bit of context from Nikos. And as you said, we'll be hearing from these 3 city stories shortly. You're keeping Sally busy with the acronyms, so if we're using terminologies we don't understand, feel free to jump in and ask us what they are. So as you said, part of today is to just try and be as transparent and as demystifying as we can be. And on that theme, let's maybe go out to the second set of polls. We've got a couple of questions here. These are more technical. They're more about your level of understanding. And I'll leave Sally just to explain what they're going to be.
Thanks, Ed. Yes, we're going to go to a couple of other polls here now to find out a bit more about your experience in relation to funding and finance and what they mean for you in your work. So I'm going to have the first poll, please, Vasily. Just 2 questions here. The first one is, let's find out which of the following you're already familiar with. So by familiar with, we mean you know a bit about, not necessarily that you're operationalizing. So funding packages that combine ESIF, which is European Structural Investment Funds, with domestic funds, so with national level funds potentially. Or number 2, funding packages that mix public and private sector investments, where we're getting a public-private sector match or mix. Thirdly, financial instruments that enable revolving funds like loans. And fourthly, EIB technical support, that's the European Investment Bank technical support. This we'll hear about a bit later on, I think. And maybe you're not familiar with any of these, but you're here to find out more. So maybe E would be none, but interested in knowing more. So please tick all that apply on that poll. It gives us a sense of which of these you're already working with or thinking about or have some knowledge of. So Vasily, how are we doing on the responses to this poll?
I think we need about 20 seconds more.
20 seconds more. This is not scientific, it's anonymized. Just tick the ones you think you might know something about. It's not an exam, it's for us to know what level of knowledge there is in our audience with these different instruments at city and at regional level and at national level. Okay, let's close that poll, Vasily, and look to the answers for that, please. So we'll see which of those are the most used. So the top one, funding packages that combine structural funds with domestic funds, was by far the biggest response there, but also private and public sector came second, and financial instruments. So there's quite a bit of knowledge in the room, actually. That's good to know. It means about 23 people in the room. Some people have not so much knowledge and they're interested in finding out more, but we do have people who have some experience of mixing in different ways, different types of funding packages. So that's really good to know. Okay, can we move on to the next poll, please?
Yes, let's launch the second poll.
Thank you. So this one, we want you to choose two of these options, and we want to know what you think the biggest barriers are that cities face. So at city level, what do cities face relating to finance? And the options we've given you are lack of funding resources, shortage of the technical capacity, so understanding how to do it in local government, complexity of the funding mechanisms. Maybe you look at them and think this is just way too much to get my head around, this is very complex. A limited pipeline of viable projects. So that means you need to have projects that are ready to go. Your project preparation needs to be ready to be able to attract investment and put that together. Low and long-term returns on investment might be one of the issues you face. Appetite for risk. There's some risk involved in some of these instruments and investments. So cities maybe don't have an appetite for risk. That's a bit of a mismatch. And the last option would be difficulty finding the right investment partners. You can't find the right people who might want to invest in your project. So if you could choose two of these, again, not scientific, just have a look and think which you think, in your experience or your knowledge of working with cities, which of these two barriers might be the ones that are the most difficult for cities when it comes to finance and funding. So how are we doing on the response now, Vasily?
We are reaching 80 finished responses, so let's take our last 20 seconds.
We've got 20 seconds. Please, the ones who haven't responded, just tick a couple. Let's see what we come up with in the answers here. We'll get the response in a minute. And again, this will help our speakers, our rapporteur, our experts to kind of understand and relate to which of these barriers are the most prevalent in our audience, which is a significant size audience today that's come on board. So let's see what the responses are there. Okay, quite interesting. The biggest response is shortage of technical capacity. So that means that there aren't maybe the staff, the expertise inside the local government to be able to understand these mechanisms and operate them. So that was the biggest response. And very closely following that was the complexity. So those two things are linked. Having the technical capacity to deal with the complexity of these mechanisms seems to be a big barrier. After that, we had, and the answers are fairly even, to do with long and low-term return on investment, appetite for risk, lack of funding, and difficulty finding investment. So the rest are sort of equal, I would say, but the two biggest ones are shortage of technical capacity and complexity of the mechanism. So hopefully by the end of the webinar this morning, some of that complexity might have been broken down a little bit, and we can hear from cities who've managed to do this, how they've managed to do it, what skills they needed to do it, and we're going to hear directly from the people involved. So hopefully we get to break down some of these barriers this morning. That's great, I hope so. Let's come back to that at the end and see if we've achieved that objective. And in the meantime, keep coming with your questions and comments in the chat, because we want to be able to answer your questions and build capacity to use these instruments. Okay, back to you, Ed. Thanks for participating, everybody. That's really interesting. And back to you, Ed.
Thanks a lot, Sally. Yeah, that was really interesting, actually. And the technical issue, the capacities issue, and the complexity, we're maybe not that surprised to see those, but it's still really affirming and helpful. And as Sally said, this is part of an ongoing conversation about how we get better at supporting the cities, maybe in particular smaller and medium-sized cities, in terms of being able to bring in a wider funding package. So let's jump straight into our city stories then, because this is a good point to pick up on some of the things you've been telling us. Let's go from actually Nikos is in Athens, and coincidentally our first speaker, Yanis Mopodis, is also in Athens. Yanis was heavily involved in the city strategy in Athens and now is the Vice President of the Green Fund in the city. Yanis, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. The floor is yours. I'll give you a minute. Yeah, you're sharing your content. Fabulous. I'll mute my mic and looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us this morning.
Hello, Eddie. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for organizing everything. So let me get straight into the point because I have a lot to cover in the next 10 minutes. I'm an urban planner. I'm not a financial expert, so I replied B into the previous poll. But I had a strong involvement with the funding scheme of Athens. And right now, in a different capacity, I'm also advising other authorities how to get funding. I used to be the mayor's advisor for 7 years between 2012 and 2019. And I'm going to present now what we did for Athens in order to finance one of the largest, I would say, funding program that the city has ever experienced, and how the different sources were combined, basically. Just to give you a heads up to everyone that's listening, the fact that Athens, the municipality of Athens, is just the city center of the metropolitan area. Basically, it covers a large part of land, but the residents that live in the municipality are approximately 800,000. So when we're talking about Athens and all this program that I'm going to talk about, basically refers to the center of the city, not the metropolitan area or in general. The capital metropolitan governance is not really existent in Athens, but this is a different topic. So what we did in Athens is, first of all, we started drafting what we called an integrated territorial investment. This was a tool that we were able to address and to put together with a strong focus in order to establish an intermediate managing authority. This was one of the first intermediate managing authority that was ever established in Greece, and one of the very first throughout Europe. It was a pilot phase, I would say, and a case study for a city-level organization to have an intermediate managing authority to manage European structural investment funds, mostly from the regional and from the social program. And with this draft plan in 2011, we were able to get a first program of 55 million euros to manage under our own, with our own authority. So having our own managing authority, we started drafting specific comprehensive plans towards 2020 and 2030, as you will see later. The first and the most important of which was the Strategic Urban Action Plan that we put together and was approved in 2015. It was a specific action plan, let's say that it was following legal guidelines from the ministry. So it was approved by 15 different ministries. It included 65 different actions, as most action plans that many of you will probably be familiar with. It was for a specific area of downtown Athens. This is the area shown here in green. So as you will see, it basically focused on 1/5 of the area of the municipality, or maybe even less. And with this plan in hand, we were able to get 85 million euros from European structural funds through a call from the regional authority. I will cover this later on. Through these different calls, though, that the regional authorities issued throughout Europe, or ministries for ITIs to transfer funds to the lower local authorities. Along with that, Athens became a member of the Resilient Cities, and as part of this network, we were asked to draft our own strategy for 2030. Many many cities in Europe have been part of this, let's say, initiative. It was a separate plan, let's say, action plan or a strategy towards 2030 instead of 2020. These are some of the pillars and what we try to do, as you will see on the screen. But this was the first time that Athens put together a long-term strategy, and along with this resilient strategy, we also conducted our climate change strategy. So this strategy was also our climate change strategy for the Covenant of Mayors, for C40, and these networks that really ask for this type of strategies. So with these strategies in place, we were able to attract different types of funding. And we created this larger ITI, which added to a total number of funds of 240 million euros, out of which 21% came from European structural funds, which is the number that I mentioned before, so 85 million. Along with that, we were able to get a loan from the European Investment Bank, which I will talk later on. And in this process, we were able to add different funding from our own municipal funding and regional funding. These are both typical public funds that you would ask. And this is a breakdown of the table of the different projects in the different sectors and the different financing sources that come into place. So catching up exactly where Nikos previously mentioned that Athens tried to pioneer this type of investment program approach, we will not go after funding on a project-by-project basis, but we would go after large amounts of funding on a project-level basis. This was steered by the regional call for the ITI, but was also steered from our own comprehensive plans that we put together, and we saw the results later on in the process. So this is the overall image of the total funding, and of course there are discounts, and these projects are not into procurement or do not even have mature studies or ready to be procured, but these are rough estimates that were used to guarantee and secure all the funding. So going into the EIB loan that I mentioned before, they called it Athens Urban Investment Framework Loan. The terms that EIB usually gives to local authorities, I should also say that we had a state guarantee in this loan. Every local authority in Greece is allowed to get guarantee from the government for this type of loans. It was 55 million. The allocation that the EIB allows is a 90-10% allocation on a project basis, and then a 50% allocation maximum on the total ITI, so on the total project that I showed before. In this table that I showed before basically breaks down in 80 different projects, and it was the first time that NCFF was implemented. I will explain what NCFF means later down the process. So as part of this loan of 55 million, the city was able to get two different types of technical assistance, one from Urbis and one from NCFF, which is the Natural Capital Finance Facility. And these technical assistance programs is what I'm going to talk about, because we saw that this is a big question, the majority of in the answer in the previous poll, talking about the technical capacity of the local authorities. So technical assistance was very important for us. The first one coming from Urbis was 500,000 euros. It was used we put the most difficult projects in the hands of the European Investment Bank. So we proposed listed buildings to be dealt with and handle structural issues and try to achieve near zero energy buildings when we talk about architectural listed buildings, so preserved buildings in other sense. And this was a technical assistance procured by EIB. This is a separate, let's say, a different approach. So the city doesn't really do anything until we have a contract with a local contractor that does the studies. This is some very indicative pictures of the projects that we gave the contractor to study. As I said, listed buildings and difficult buildings to be dealt with in other senses, open air cinemas. And the idea is, this is a brief description of the type of measures that have been examined when we're talking about energy efficiency. And the struggle now is how to approve this type of interventions in buildings that are preserved by the ministries and for architectural issues, etc. The second technical assistance is what I mentioned before, NCFF, the Natural Capital Finance Facility. Same amount of technical assistance. However, it required a guaranteed project implementation and financing of at least 7 million euros. So it had a, how they call it, minimum amount to be invested. It was targeted in open spaces and public space, and the idea is to boost biodiversity and enhance blue and green infrastructure. What this means is basically taking specific streets and public squares in Athens and make them more green, make them more pedestrian friendly, and better for the environment. And the last part of the technical assistance that we were able to get was C40 technical assistance with a focus on solar PVs, both for private residents, but also for public information. We drafted the business case tool to create an incentive-based funding program for solar PV. So the city would be able, and now is drafting the specific program to give, let's say, microfinancing to individual households to install solar PVs. And in order to make this more, let's say, public information and for the people to understand what it means, we provided an open data map exactly like this. This is an example of what Google is basically offering in almost throughout the United States. Athens is now launching this on a WebGIS format, where each, let's say, resident of the city can see his specific property and what is the potential for a solar PV installation. So, trying to conclude, I would like to say first that it is very important for a local authority to draft an ITI, how you call it, or a sustainable urban strategy, however you want to call it, but draft a concrete and medium or long-term action plan that showcases specific projects, that showcases specific strategies, and has a clear, let's say, focus to it. Second, it was much easier for us to combine this funding and propose a total investment program level funding offering than a project by project offering, which would be much more time consuming and much more difficult to do, especially when you don't have ready to procure projects. However, and I would like to point out these two, challenges. First of all, the urban authorities are dependent on regional governance of ITIs, for example, here in Greece, since the regional authorities issue the calls and issue the guidelines. So the region, for example, in Athens, put a threshold on 85 million for ITIs. So that this was as much as we could get, even though we will be able to get more. And then national financing schemes are also affecting what you can do. So in many cases, local authorities are tied to this. And, I have to say now that I'm advising other local authorities, if you're not coming from a big city, talking to EIB, for example, or EU for direct funding is not as easy as, when you're coming from a larger city, even if you have everything that it is required. And the second challenge is that in many cases, TAs, technical assistance programs, are very important to local authorities. We know that, but the way they're structured, they're linked to financing terms or financial products. And this creates a problem for local authorities since they need to have a specific program ready before they ask for the TAs. In this sense, I have to say that the EU city facility that now had the call last month, now is moving ahead, is providing technical assistance to local authorities without tying this to financial products. And this is something that's more. So this is everything I had to say. I'm open for questions, and back to you, Eddie.
Fantastic. That's really, really, really interesting. Thanks so much, Yanis. And you triggered lots of comments and questions in the chat, so that's exactly what we want. Stay with us, please, because we're going to bring some of those questions back in. We'll also bring Gwendolyn in shortly. Before we do that, though, I'd like to just bring in Adam Abdul Wahab from the Commission. Abdul, I know you're a bit crunched this morning with your diary, so can I just bring you in and maybe share with us a few headlines about the next programming period in the new regulations, the kind of thing that Yanis has been talking about? Is it going to be business as usual, more of the same, or do we see some big changes coming towards us? And then I'll go across to Sally after that to pick up with Gwendolyn and then the questions. But Adam, first of all, just let's a few thoughts from you, please. Adam, can you hear me? This is one of those moments, I think. So it looks as though Adam, are you there?
Eddie, I don't see Adam on board.
I don't see him. Okay. Yeah. And typically, my neighbour has our schedules. Every day we do one of these sessions, he starts doing do-it-yourself work in the garden. I hope you can hear me okay. Sally, back to you. Let's just pick up on Gwendolyn and the audience then.
So I'm going to bring a question from the chat, but we've also had, I think Adam has been muted, so perhaps the technical team could bring Adam back in whilst I'm bringing in this question from the chat, because he's still with us, but we need to be...
Okay, sorry, they did it in the meanwhile. So.
Okay, cool, so we can go to Adam.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I don't know whether it's good news or bad news. I wouldn't say business as usual, but I would say that the main underlying the fundamentals haven't changed. So we maintain an integrated approach. We haven't changed the paradigm. Nevertheless, we had a couple of changes, which I don't think I have the time to go into the details. I would say that one of the probably the most visible one is that instead of having 11 thematic objectives, we are going to have 5, as we try to simplify things in many ways. And one of them is especially relevant because that is the 5th policy objective, which is particularly addressed to sustainable and integrated development in rural and coastal areas. So it's kind of very explicitly there that this is the policy objective that covers integrated urban development. And the other simplification coming from the unit dealing with financial instruments, so we are very proud of it, is that we simplify the possibility to combine grants and financial instruments in one operation. So before that, it meant, and even in this current period, except from some specific cases, if you wanted to combine grants and financial instruments, general loans, to give one beneficiary, then you had to basically have 2 separate procedures. In many cases, 2 separate or different agencies providing the 2 different type of support. And then we basically said that this is just not necessary and not sustainable. So there will be in the future a possibility to combine the 2 in one operations, which means that there will be only one procedure, the famous or infamous audit trail, one agency that can disperse both types of funds. So it will simplify a lot. In the future, there will be only one kind of a subset of rules, and we hope that this will mean that there will be a much more take-up of this kind of a combination, and I think it will be possible to way better target the needs on the ground. This is what I'd like to highlight quickly, but I'm happy to go into the details, and we have a lot of details. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Adam. Thanks for coming in there. I'm just going to bring in one of the questions that was in the chat for, I think, maybe for Gwendolyn or to answer. And it's a question about the capacity of small and medium-sized cities to access this kind of technical assistance, these kind of investment funds, especially given that their capacity, their portfolio, and their expertise. The example was from the operational program in Umbria, where it said also Jessica was not activated in the past. But we do have an example in the chat also from Marco saying in Sardinia, Jessica was very useful and funded 52 different urban regeneration energy efficiency projects. There's some variation there, but I think an important point about how not just the big cities, but small and medium-sized cities develop the capacity to access these kind of technical systems and instruments, and also that their operational programs enable that. So maybe, I don't know if Adam or Gwendolyn wants to have a go at answering that quickly.
I've actually already built it into my reflections. So if I may, maybe I can outline, and it will be part of the answer, and actually has also been part of Jasper's work that we've been doing. I would love to sort of start by just saying thank you very much to the Commission, but also let's take into my reflections this message: easier and less administrative to actually be able to do what Athens did, which is to work with an ITI or to work within the context of actually combining funds. And this means combining EU funds, but also combining EU funds and national and private funds. Now, going back to the focus of the seminar, this is about effective financing mechanisms in the context of sustainable urban development. Just maybe one little bit of introduction to myself. I work at JASPERS, which is a technical advisory unit set up by the Commission and the EIB to particularly help with the preparation of projects, but also to prepare with exactly this financial mechanisms in the context of cohesion funds. And this actually already answers to the final point of Yannis that he very eloquently just presented to all of us, which is there are also technical advisory mechanisms available by the Commission. There's actually a multitude of them for different areas also of urban investment, for instance, the energy efficiency area or the housing area or the combined and integrated urban investment areas, which you could activate. For me, what Athens just presented is an example of the successful use of an ITI, which is this integrated territorial investment, which is a mechanism to combine these funds at local level. And here's my reflection number one. From the Commission perspective, and also for the perspective of smaller or medium-sized cities, what matters possibly is efficiency of scale. This is something that countries decide in the context of how they work with EU funds. So these are mechanisms that are being organized and made effective. So Rotterdam has an ITI and has had an ITI for I believe something like 30 years now. We heard this in one of the workshops. Also, Poland has a long history of working with ITIs, as does here Athens. What we see at JASPERS and what we've worked with is also with the context of metropolitan areas. Interesting that Athens basically already said we worked on the city center within the boundaries of the municipalities, but there would be the question on how would we work as a metropolitan area, or to work within regional contexts. Here, for example, we're in very early preparatory work, for instance, in Ireland, where we're helping to look at a small, say, growth hub city that would connect to the surrounding smaller areas. My second point and second reflection for the purpose of the entire audience, I think, is to say there are different types of ITIs. Athens here has combined EU funds with national funds and EIB funds. However, there are also ITIs that we have supported, for instance, that combine EU funds, so the structural funds and, for instance, social funds, which already is often a challenge. And this is, in both of these cases, there are examples and an interesting challenges and experiences that you can learn from in the context of this. Generally speaking, what this ITI allows you is to create more efficiency, more combination between funds, and also to share risks in a way that it will actually enable you to actually multiply the impact of these funds. I think that's a very important point that we also saw in the context of Athens. And I think my last reflection here is to say what's very important is to be aware of the different requirements of the different funds. And whilst this is going to possibly be less administrative and easier, there are also very effective mechanisms to look into how to take the monitoring and audit of the different funds on board from the beginning, and to actually build this both into the governance structure of an ITI, for instance, into how you set up, for instance, expert commission boards in the context of this, but also how to build this into the strategy that you are supporting with this ITI. One of the entry points, by the way, a good entry point to access a lot of the technical advisory and advisory the EIB has to offer would be Urbis, which actually is a one-stop shop at the EIB to access all different type of financial advisory available to you.
Thanks, Gwendolyn. I think your sound might have gone there. You're frozen there. Anyway, thanks for those really helpful reflections. Thanks for your questions. Great questions coming in. Keep them coming. We'll pick up on the questions in the chat bar. None of them will get lost. We'll try and deal with them one way or another. Let's take a short break. It's 11:05 at the moment. Let's take a break for 5 minutes. Rejoin us at 10 past, and we'll jump back into our city stories. Thanks to Yanis, thanks to Adam, thanks to Gwendolyn, thanks to all of you, and we'll see you all shortly. Okay, thanks a lot, folks. So, hi there, everybody. Welcome back. Hope you had a chance to have a stretch, maybe a little shake around, cup of coffee or something. So we're going to keep going. We're going to jump back in. As we said at the start, our second city presentation this morning comes from Bilbao. We're really happy to have Jordan Guardao with us today. Jordan just told us at the break that there's a demonstration going on outside his office in City Hall. So if you hear any background noises, that's what that's about. So hopefully the windows are closed and we'll be able to hear you perfectly. Jordan, great to see you. The floor is yours. We look forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. So just as Eddie said, my sincere apologies if you hear some background noise. Due to the pandemic, we've decided to close all the bars, and not everyone is very happy with that decision. So again, my apologies for the noise. So I'm going to share with you a little story about how Bilbao's been coping with our funding, how we've mixed matched funding, how we've brought in the private sector, and how this, aside from being a little bit messy, we've really achieved great success. So please let's start. So some of you may know the story behind Bilbao's transformation. Bilbao was a very gray city, a city of mines, a city of iron, a city of shipbuilders, of high ovens. And the picture that you see on the left is Bilbao 30 years ago. That's the Bilbao I grew up in, of course, with lots of strikes and strife. But that's the Bilbao that we had very short time ago. And we've come a huge long way since then. We have a very different city. And it's amazing how we've done this. Next, please. So we had to reinvent completely the city. It's not only about rebuilding the city, but about reimagining what a city is. And of course, coming up with a new whole concept of city, changing the leitmotif of the city, the idea that's behind it, its soul in a sense, its identity. It's something that we've only been able to do thanks to a very innovative and collaborative approach. So many times when there's problems out there, and when there's opportunities out there, everyone looks at the town hall. So, You can hear the noise in the background. Many people think that the COVID situation is partly because of the town hall, and that's true in many places and in many cases, but that's not true. So the city is not about the town hall. It's about everyone that lives in it and everybody that participates in the city somehow. So it's about the people, the citizens. It's about the academia, the universities. It's about the companies. And it's also about the people that visit us as tourists or used to visit us. Of course, we don't have many tourists now. But it's a collective effort to build a city and to reimagine what a city is. Next, please. So it might be strange that I haven't mentioned funding yet. Isn't this about funding? Well, yes, it is, but in a sense, it's not. It's about creating compelling stories. It's about sharing a vision. It's about looking forward and really working hard together to create a future for the city. And one that we have that, funding will come. It's just about generating the right momentum in the city, the right mindset to create a transformative ideology and mentality, and really help people embrace an idea that's larger than themselves. So creating a city is something that is much larger than each one of us. It's about creating communities, about shared dreams, about shared ideas, about reimagining the future, about creating a place to grow up our children. And that's something that doesn't have to do very much with funding, but if we do that right, funding will come. So how did we do that in Bilbao? How are we doing it? Well, first of all, it's essential to have a strong leadership. So not everything is because of the town hall, but it's true that that's something that we have to do. So we created a holistic city view. We created and we strengthened the position of this innovation department, because only that's the only way that we can really move the city. So many of the public workers, many of the politicians perhaps have they are very good at what they do on a day-to-day basis, but putting them outside their comfort zone, it's not easy for them. It's not easy for any one of us, and that's really something that we had to push from the top down. Next, please. So a little focus on Torrozaurre. Bilbao is a rather small city, not only in terms of population. We're about 350,000 inhabitants within a 1 million metropolitan area, but we are within a valley, inside the steep valley. So we don't have very much room to grow. Bilbao is 41 square kilometers. Roughly half of that is hillside and mountains, so we can't do anything there. And we don't have very much space to grow. So if we want to reinvent the city, it's not only about the ideas, it's about making things happen. And many times the best way to show that things are happening is by actually building something. You have to touch it. This is the magic of cities. It's not only about ideas. It's not only about creating ecosystems. It's about also building them and touching them and touching the new reality that we are building. And Torrozaurre is a perfect spot for that. It's a brownfield that we are recovering for the city. And it's the last space that we have in the city to grow. And of course, to test new things that we want to scale up to the rest of the city. And it is one of the key points that I wanted to convey today. Scaling things up is a key challenge. So it's not about having good ideas. It's about having good ideas that can be replicated and scaled up. So it makes no sense to have a marvelous neighborhood in Torrozaurre if the rest of the city is struggling. So we have to test things that can be scaled up afterwards. Next, please. So first of all, what we had to do was to create a strategy. So where do we want to focus? So we created, thanks to the Urbax program, a project called Focus, where we created a smart specialization strategy at a city level, where we aligned our strategic sectors with those of the Basque Country. So city and region working together to push the same sectors. So one of them is advanced manufacturing. You've seen before that Bilbao was, it was a huge factory rather than a city some time ago. And we don't want the factories back in the city, but from the city we can push the Industry 4.0 strategy of the Basque Country. And in this sense, we envisioned 3 different sectors that we can push to create a combined effort to push forward society as a whole. Next, please. So again, there's 2 ways of looking at this. It's about developing specific sectors, creating the knowledge, the teams, the projects, but it's also about creating points of interest in the city. I said before that there's a lot of value to building things because that's how people see and feel that things are moving. So it's not only about developing new knowledge, new business models, new services and products. It's also about creating physical environments that encourage people and make them believe that this is happening. Next, please. I'm going to try to speed up because I'm running out of time. So the first example I wanted to share with you is our energy vision. So of course, about wants to have a very proactive role in energy transition. This is, of course, a global trend. We all know that global climate change is a huge hazard and an issue for all of us. And we've set up a different projects. This that are here are all European funded projects. And we are pushing everything. We are combining different projects again to create the right momentum. And that's the right word and the right concept for this. So we're bringing together academia, we're bringing companies, we're bringing private citizens to create the right mindsets and help them push forward. And we can't do that with just one project. This is not something that we can do in 2, 3, 4 years. We need long-term goals, long-term financial support, of course. It's kind of the fuel that really makes the machine move. And again, it's about creating teams, networks, and in a sense, it's important to realize that no project can live forever out of public funding alone. So we have to, perhaps public funding can be the Kickstarter of this, but we have to little by little transition the leadership of these initiatives from the town hall and the public administration, generally speaking, to the public in general. Next, please. Okay, another case study regarding this places is the Beta 2 building. This is a screw factory built in the 1950s, where we are doing lots of very interesting things. Next, please. So this is how the building's looking now. Of course, we're refurbishing the building. This is in the center of Torresaure, in a brownfield where there's absolutely nothing going on. So we want to transform the neighborhood, and this is kind of the first thing that we are doing there. Next, please. So what kind of things are we doing there? I said before that we are trying to transform the energy landscape of the city. So we are developing a geothermal district heating and, of course, PV panels, integrated energy management, etc. And we are testing those things there. Again, we are also pushing advanced manufacturing. You can see here 2 of the strategic sectors of the city. We had a hugely successful Urban Innovative Action program there, where we've created an ecosystem joining academia, entrepreneurs, companies, networking activities that is really pushing this from a very urban perspective. And of course, the Sustainable Urban Development Strategy, which is a very, very broad infrastructure program that is helping us refurbish that building. Next, please. Yeah, well, these are the projects that we are developing there. Next one, please. So this is a very brief thing that I wanted to share with you. So the people that we bring here, the companies that we bring here, the academia that we bring here is the essential part. So of course, these European projects have their partners, but we also have an extended stakeholder map where people that are not perhaps very closely linked to this project have to participate in this project. So it's about developing new ideas and making people believe in them. So it's not only about the 10, 15 companies or organizations that work in this project as partners. It's about sharing that with everyone else, with different levels of the government, with different academia, with different businesses, and with society as a whole. Next, please. So just some final remarks. Some of them I've already mentioned before. Public funding is key. It's a way to help companies acquire new knowledge, companies develop new processes, new markets, and that's for the people. At the end, it's about creating jobs. It's about creating competitivity, and many times it's to the public administration to really kickstart this. And EU funding are a great way of doing this. In a sense, it's a safety net where we as a city can test new things, and also companies can develop new products and test them in the field. So it's not only about academic papers, it's about actually doing things. this is something that has to be very aligned with the strategy. Otherwise, it's going to be just some fireworks that you burn, are very pretty and just fade away. And it's not about that. Again, scaling up and replicating, about consolidating things. And in the end, again, it's about creating the right momentum to really push forward long-term strategies and long-term ways of doing things. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jordan. Escali Casco to you too. That was really, really brilliant. And lots of great images there, the fireworks, series right at the end. I really liked your comment about no project can live forever on public funds. Your points about scalability were super, and also the way you talked about just the time this has taken and the kind of the layering of the experience in Bilbao really kind of brought to life how you use the money and how you linked it to some of our earlier topics in this series, the multi-level governance conversation, integration. We started with strategies, so all of those were in that great presentation. Thank you. Stay with us. I'm sure people will have questions maybe about how you involve some of these private sector partners, how that model works, maybe other things that you mentioned there. Let's keep moving. Let's jump from the Basque Country to Sweden, to Western Sweden. Let's go to Gothenburg. We're keeping our focus on innovation. We're delighted to have Sarah Pettersson and Frederick Block with us from the city of Gothenburg, who are working together, as they will explain, on a range of things, but we've asked them today to talk about green bonds specifically, and also the city's approach to some of the financial products that we've been already talking about today. Sarah, Peter, Frederick, great to see you. I'll mute my microphone. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ed, and hope you can hear me. My name is Sarah Pettersson, and I'm here joining you from the city of Gothenburg, working at the City Hall with mainly environmental and climate issues. I also have my colleague, Frederick Block, from the financial department with me. Next, please. So we just want to take a moment to welcome you to the greenest city on earth as soon as the situation allows it. We are the second largest city in Sweden, and we are about 500,000 inhabitants. So I must say that we recognize ourselves very much in the story of Bilbao, but in the city of Gothenburg, it's not a brownfield, it's our old shipyard that we are now developing. Next, please. So on a more, so this is what we are very proud of right now in the city of Gothenburg. We are developing a new environmental and climate program. It's a proposition, but it's soon to be decided by the city council, hopefully. And we aim to be one of the most progressive cities in the world to tackle climate change and the climate and environmental issues. It's based on 3 head goals: to aim to have a sustainable nature, to have a close to a zero climate footprint by 2030, but we also focus on the citizens and the human health, of course. So Frederick, do you want to add anything to this picture?
Thank you, Sarah. Well, we have a high ambition in Sweden, and it's all about sharing a vision, and as Bilbao said, and this is our vision heading to the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please.
Yeah. Oh, I just want to add that it's important to know that when we talk about the climate footprint, we also add the consumption perspective to our climate emissions, which is quite unique for Gothenburg. And this is also the foundation to our green bonds, and it's also part of the city sub-strategic priorities.
Thank you. So let's do as Nico asked us to do. Let's explore green bonds. And this graph shows the development in volume on the world bond market. The city of Gothenburg issued its first green bonds 7 years ago as the first city in the world. And as you can see, the market has been booming ever since, much due to the climate crisis. And the big innovation with green bonds, it's not the greenness, it's about transparency, because now investors can follow their money all the way down to the investment project. Now they know exactly where their money is being used. And this has been some spin-off effects. This year, social bonds has also been very popular due to the pandemic. Next, please. So the green market is booming, but worldwide, it's only 1% of outstanding bond volumes that are green, but not in Sweden, and especially not within cities in Sweden, because here almost 1/3 of all our bonds are green. So in Sweden, it's not innovation anymore. It's pretty much standard. Next, please. And so I want to show a picture of the essence of green bonds, because it's all about cherry picking green investments. You put all your investments together and you sort out the green investment. You set up a framework stating which one is considered green, and then you start sorting them out. You package them and you give these investments to special investors. And the big question is how to get more green balls, green investments within the funnel. And please don't greenwash, because that's widening the funnel, pushing in investment projects that are considered green. Next, please. And this is an overview of the green bond process. And we can talk a whole lot about this page, but just briefly, you start with setting up your framework, setting up your boundaries for what is considered green. And then you pick up the funnel and you sort out the green investments. After that, you must keep track of your green money. So you open a green account and you separate the green money from the rest. And last but not least, you need to report your impact on all your green investments. Anything to add to that, Sarah?
No, I think we can further explore that on the next picture, right? Next slide. Yeah, so on a more detailed level, Fredrik mentioned the framework. So this is our contract with the investors. This is how they know this is our promise on how green our projects are going to be. So we updated our framework, as we call it, last year. So this is our new framework as of September of 2019. It's all open, it's all free. Just use whatever you like and steal whatever you want from this knowledge. So this tells you a little bit more about what we call green in the city of Gothenburg. The city has a very wide portfolio of investments. We have a lot of different operations. We do anything from building roads to producing energy. We have schools, of course, but we also have an amusement park and things like that within our city operations. But this framework especially aims to tell you what is green within the green bonds. So, for example, we have our categories here on the right hand of the picture. We have renewable energy, we have green buildings, we have energy efficient projects, clean transportation, waste management, water and wastewater management, sustainable land use and environmental management, and climate change adaptation. These are pretty much standard project categories within green bonds. And they are linked to the SDGs as well. And also, I have to repeat also that it's based on our environmental and climate program. Fredrik, do you want to add to this?
No, it's crystal clear for us. Hopefully for you too.
Change. So this is shows our actual portfolio as of right now. So we have 10.3 billion Swedish crown portfolio out of, this is about a fourth or a fifth of our portfolio, right, Fredrik?
Yes.
So we have a large investment part into green buildings, almost more than 75%. These are mainly schools and preschools and also rental apartments, because we own a lot of apartments in the city. And then the other 25% are spread across things like clean transportation, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and water and wastewater management. All very interesting projects. And next slide. We show you a few examples of the actual investments. We have an energy efficient preschool that also have solar panels on the roof. And we have a large fleet of electrical buses that travel around the city. And we also have solar panels field, which is the first out of 2 fields that are built in the city of Gothenburg, but by our energy company. Next. So, and as Fredrik said, very important is that you have to report your environmental impact each year. So first, you issue your green bond, or you tell the market by the framework what is your green bond, and then you issue your green bonds. But then you also have to report back where did the money go, what are the projects, what do they contain, and what are the environmental impacts of these projects. And this is where the hard work begins. Right, Fredrik?
Yes. Next slide, please. So time is running out, so I'm just going to focus on the middle point here. If today you have a bond program, you should issue green bonds, no question about it. But you can borrow green money without doing your own bonds. You can go to the European Investment Bank, you can go to the Nordic Investment Bank and take up green loans, and they will issue green bonds in order to finance your loans. So that is an easier way to go if you don't have your own bond program. Next slide, please. And if you want to read more about our work in Gothenburg, please visit our homepage, and we have a whole section about green bonds. Next, please. And we want to thank you for listening, and please contact us if you have any questions. Back to you, Ed.
Thanks a lot, Fredrik. Thanks, Sarah. That was great. It was a really good double act you did there. So well done. Not easy. Easier in real life than doing it here. So you handled that really nicely. Thanks. I'm sure we get lots of interest, and this is in many ways the start of a conversation. So I know that some of you at the beginning talked about the technical expertise being an issue, the complexity of funds. So some of the things that Gothenburg just talked about is just now may connect with some of those things you you raised in our polls at the start. So please stay with us, Frederick and Sarah. We also have Jordan still with us from Bilbao. We also have Yanis still with us from Athens. So Sally's going to have a little look at some of the questions we've got. We'll bring those back in. Before we do that, though, let's go back to our rapporteur today, whose antennae are switched on and twitching. Gwendolyn, please come back in and just maybe share some headlines from the things you've just heard from those two latest inputs from Jordan, from Frederick, and from Sarah in Gothenburg.
Very, very interesting presentations of what I would say are absolute front runners of something we're seeing more and more of, I suppose. Real trends, but you are the avant-garde who have been trying and testing this for years now. However, from an EIB perspective, we've seen more this as a trend in both cases. So in the case of Bilbao, of course, to really do multi-sectoral development of urban action areas, neighborhoods, districts that then multiply and scale and replicate across the city to support the Sustainable Urban Development Plan. In the case of Gothenburg, the green, or like you say, the social bonds. However, I also want to just mention that there's also the financial instruments and the financial platforms that are not part of this concrete session, but are part of the handbook, just as a plug to say there is a third area of smart financing associated with urban investment programs that, for instance, also the EIB really supports if this is something that you would consider. A few reflections. So from what I thought was Bilbao, for me, actually is an example of this brownfield regeneration and how to layer in the context of financing effective targeting of financing. And this is maybe an appeal to the audience here in this workshop today. Is one of the things we ask our counterparts to do is identify and map your relevant brownfields, be they harbors, riverside, the riverside, the former industrial sites. Post-COVID, by the way, to bring a very the now thing into the room, is we're seeing a particular trend from an urban perspective towards green spaces and public spaces, which may or should be taken into consideration here when you're considering reimagining your cities, as well as how different areas of the city, and in particular the city center, is linked to other urban areas. For Bilbao, for me, or from an ERB perspective, is clearly an example of how to leverage private funding, but also third sector and civil society funding. It is also an example of how important it is to consider how will you actually be sustainable and transition to financial self-sustainability. I really would like to come back to that point. Well made. And this is where, from a structural or cohesion funds perspective, that this is the consideration within your investment program to consider how to leverage your structural funds in the most effective way to do turnaround at urban level, to then actually continue to actually be able to do the kind of innovation and the kind of development and growth that you can see in the Bilbao example. Technically, multiple ways of doing this. Again, I refer to the handbook, where some of them are very well described, which is, for instance, a city contract. This could be an ITI. This could be an urban axis if you are a city or a region with a lot of cohesion funds. This could be an EIB framework contract, where you can also combine grant financing with loan and equity financing. Key, plan medium term at least, and bring in the long term, strong vision and strong area-based analysis. This is where a lot of our technical assistance focuses, is on actually bringing the the spatial, social, economic, and environmental analysis together, and I'm sure that basically both of our speakers would actually support this. Just switching shortly over, not shortly, because I think the very comprehensive presentation by Gothenburg. Maybe if I can have 1 minute more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Super. These are what I really liked about the presentation from the Gothenburg of the bonds example is how such an innovative financing mechanism, which, like you say, is the green bond, or can also be the social impact bond, can actually work to stimulate the local ecosystems. And I think there are a couple of, this is something I would really like to stress and support, which is it's a mechanism to actually bring in your local banks, your local firms, and even your citizens into the actual investment and financing scheme, and therefore potentially leverage more impact. It's also a way to actually increase collaboration between the different parts of the municipality. And this is something that in the context of sustainable urban development, we're seeing over and over again is a huge challenge, of course. And therefore, I believe that here Gothenburg really sort of is an example on how this can be overcome. Which leads me to my two final points, which is
very briefly, please, Wendelin.
Yep. The key to working with these financial instruments and working with innovation and innovative finances are strong pipelines of projects. And for strong pipelines of projects, these need to be very well embedded in the sustainable urban development strategies. But as such, they need to be developed as individual multi-sectoral projects as well. And this is where a lot of help is available through a whole raft of, for instance, also technical assistances that the Commission supports, but also the EIB has to offer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gwendolyn. And some of the those technical assistance channels you referred to, we've been sharing in the chat. If there are things you're hearing about for the first time today, please explore some of the rich set of resources available to cities. Thanks, Gwendolyn. Not easy to compress all this stuff in a few sentences. You did it really fantastically well. Sally, can I come over to you? We've got a few more minutes for questions. Do we have any questions for Bilbao, Gothenburg, or maybe even for our initial speaker, Yanis from Athens?
We do. Thanks, Ed. And as you said, there's been a lot in the chat with links, people sharing links to different platforms, projects, technical assistance, so that's great. We'll make sure we include those links in the follow-up to this webinar. For me, it was really interesting in the three presentations, they all started with their vision, their mission, their strategy, which is great to see. The funding should follow that. You get that right first. And that reminds me of the first webinar we had on strategy. So we put the links to the recordings for those in the chat too. In terms of questions, I think there's two that are kind of general. And I think maybe the first I'll ask for the Commission to pick up, which was some comments about multi-level governance and how there's a lack of alignment sometimes to using these instruments between city, regional, and European level through operational programs, and for instance in Portugal going down to a NUTS 3 level. So getting that alignment right in terms of the vertical governance structures. And another question maybe that each of the panelists might want to pick up if we have time, which was about how millennials and Generation Z are feeling about these investments in cities and whether they're committed to them or not. How are you engaging young people in these sort of perspectives in your cities and the way that the city is running its investment programs? Then a specific question for each of the cities, I'd say. For Athens, Yanis, could you tell us how important it was to have external expertise, and were you able to train your municipal staff to run these programs? A question for Bilbao about multi-stakeholder partnership, especially working with several private sector partnerships. How was that, and how did you manage that? And finally, for Gothenburg, there's a few questions asking for links to your bonds, but also to be clear, is this led by the city and not by an intermediate body or the EIB? It's the city that's running the bond framework. So perhaps first, should we ask in order, maybe Ed, Athens, then Bilbao, then Gothenburg, to answer those questions quite briefly, and then we'll go on to, I'll hand back to you, Ed and Larry, yeah? So maybe Yanis first.
Okay, hello, Sally.
Hello.
Well, regarding the questions, first of all, the one specifically for external experts, I have to say that the main involvement of external experts were when drafting our long-term strategy, so our ITI and our resilience strategy. This was a sound decision that you have to take when a new, usually administration takes over a local authority. So put some effort there for 1 year or 1 year and a half. Get your strategy together, engage most of the city employees, and then once you have your strategy, going after funding was not an issue to get external experts, I have to say. However, in that sense, it was very helpful for us that we had already established, as I mentioned, our own intermediate managing authority. So we had a specific body that had experience when managing funds from different sources, and this was very helpful in the case of Athens. But this body had internal staff, was not using external experts, so this is how we moved forward. And also to answer a little bit on the younger generation, even though eventually there was initially, I would say, not eventually, initially there was a will to support young entrepreneurs and establish financial incentives for new companies or for new establishments. These were a little bit, overturned by the COVID crisis that we have right now. So all the incentives that we have now have become horizontal to all types of businesses that have been affected by this specific crisis. So I would say now everything is horizontal. Everyone is allowed and accepted to get some type of support in different, mostly business-related support for operating expenses and stuff like that.
Thanks, Yanis. That's a really comprehensive answer, and Paula has already thanked you in the chat. That's great. Perhaps over to you, Jordan, in Bilbao. Could you tell us a bit about how you work with different different stakeholders, especially a number of private sector stakeholder partners?
Yeah, so it's kind of the same thing that when we speak about the younger generation, it's about integrating everyone into the vision and to the plans that we have as a city. So when we think about pushing forward energy transition in the city, it's not only because we think that it's a great idea from the town hall, it's because there's a public sentiment that demands for us to push that forward. And there are companies that are interested in that sector too. So only if we can advance everybody at the same time and the same pace, we can really make things change and things happen. So in a sense, it's about generating momentum. It's something that I mentioned before. So it's about starting projects little by little, but with the ambition set very high. So small steps, but the view on the horizon. It's somebody in the chat mentioned that it's interesting how we've had an incremental way of moving forward. First, the URBAC project, then urban innovative actions, the urban sustainable strategy that we have, and in a sense, it's how we like to do things. So let's look on the long term, but let's do short steps. And once we have the architecture of the project and the team there, we have to keep moving. So perhaps sharing a personal anecdote. A friend of mine was getting married some time ago, and she told me that she was extremely nervous. And I asked her, why are you extremely nervous? You've had the same boyfriend for 10 years. You've been living with him for the last 5 years. And she said, well, now we are committing to this in a different way. So we know that if we have a major problem, we have to solve it. There's no turning back. And in a sense, generating this team that's moving forward. So it's like, I don't know, when you're playing rugby and you're there with your whole team pushing forward, you cannot turn back. So you have to keep pushing. And in a sense, bringing companies together, if they know that these ideas fit in the long term, they are the ones that are going to push forward, the same as we are and the same as society is.
Thanks, Jordan. I love that analogy there, the teamwork and the marriage one, so great. And I think Luca's point in the chat was really appropriate, that you have, Bilbao has taken this approach using a very smart use of different instruments available to you in programs like URBAC, like Urban Innovative Actions, your Article 7 strategy that have built step by step built the way to this strategy. So thanks a lot for that. And so final question is for Gothenburg. I think you might have answered that in the chat, but could you just tell us about the city leadership of the Green Bond, and maybe also a bit about Gen Z, millennial, because I imagine that's maybe a different case in Gothenburg to you, with a younger generation supporting your work. Over to you for that.
Thank you, Sally. Well, first of all, I want to tell you that the Green Bond ID came from the people at the finance department in Gothenburg 8 years ago. So it's been a product from coming from below, going upwards, so to say. And just this year, the state of Sweden had issued their own green bonds. So we were long ahead of all the cities even in Sweden. And first of all, I want to talk to what Gwendolyn said. Going green is a big collaboration between the finance department and the technical environmental department. And that is why both me and Sarah are here today. I'm the financial expert and Sarah is the technical expert. And that collaboration is much needed in order for this green bond to work. And last, about young people. When I talk to young people about sustainability, it's the new normal. There is no going back. We have to get sustainable, and the young people are the ones leading this forward.
Thanks so much, guys, for your really great answers there. I'm going to hand back to Ed because I'm aware that our time is running out on us. But for me, thank you so much for those presentations. We've got great plaudits in the chat as well. Really interesting. 3 front-runner cities telling us how you're doing it. So really enlightening. Thank you. Over to you, Ed.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks, everyone. And that word you used collaboration, Frederick, which we see in different ways through all 3 of these city stories. So fantastic content. So thanks. Just to remind everyone, we are recording this session, so we'll be able to share it later, and hopefully a wider audience can access it. As Sally said, let's keep going. The time is running as ever. Let's go to the next slide, please, and let's bring Laura Hageman Ariano in with us. Hopefully, Laura, your connection's okay and things are stable. You can hear me, and you can pop your camera on maybe, and we can see you too.
My camera is on, so I hope it's working. Eddie, I don't know because I'm having problems for the whole day, but I'm very happy to be here with you for the moment.
Likewise, fantastic. So I guess I've got 2 questions for you, Laura. The first one is, from all these rich inputs we've heard today, what are maybe some of the takeaways that you're picking up from these conversations and from these presentations?
Okay, hopefully you can hear me now. So I was saying, on one hand, this integrated approach, then the involvement of stakeholders as well. In the case of Bilbao, we can see that also can help to integrate, for example, public-private funds. Then a choice of the thematic, like the green, going for green, can have an effect on using green funds. So all this issue of the strategic choices affecting how the finance comes afterwards, I will highlight that one mainly. Very obvious one,
fantastic,
but very important.
Yeah, no, but really, really important. So thanks for that. The slide we can see in front of us is in fact a slide which Adam is going to use. In a nutshell, it picks up some of the things that he mentioned before he left us. So what's ahead? So you mentioned there's business as usual, but we'll be looking at more combined packages of funding between these different funding streams we've talked about. New funds coming in, like the Resilience and Recovery Fund. A continued focus on technical assistance. We've talked about URBAS and some of the other technical assistance channels on this session. I guess my second question to you, Lara, then is, what can we say to our participants? How can they make sure they're well prepared for what's coming down the tracks in the new regulations?
Well, first of all, to say that in general, because what Adam brought up the table is very important, relates to financial instruments. But we're talking here about strategies and sustainable urban development. And in this a little bit bigger framework, in the next programming period, there's no major change. There's no major change of paradigm. We continue supporting sustainable urban strategies and a role of urban authorities in fostering urban development. So what I can say is that the first thing to do is to continue developing these strategies and continue making these strategies better based on the lessons learned on the past programming period. And the same for the financial instruments. So one very important aspect will be to engage immediately in a dialogue with managing authorities and regions, and in the terms of financing, on how these financing mechanisms can be set up maybe at national, regional level, so all the cities can use them, and that we can see that these links between the needs in financial terms of these cities and the operational programs are really like these links are well set up from the beginning. So this is basically the partnership principle, which is very high on the agenda in our funds and now in the negotiation process. But it needs to be very clear. It needs to be in the head of everyone that this is the basis to make sure that this line and this multi-level governance works from the beginning, not once the operational programs are written down and settled.
Great. Thanks a lot, Laura. Thanks for joining us. And I think that final message has run through all of these discussions in terms of don't wait. Get started now. The importance of dialogue through really clearly in our three presentations today. So nice to see you, Laura. Great to have you with us. Thanks very much. So we'll keep jumping on.
Thank you,
our next slide. So we just talked about and someone just said very helpfully in the chat how useful it is to be able to share this kind of knowledge and to have cities talking about what works and what hasn't worked. And remember, you can find the context of this session and indeed the previous sessions on these links here. In a couple of days, we'll be sending you, all of our participants, an email with all the content from this session, but you'll be able to go back to those links to pick up at the end. Please make use of the handbook, which we've been promoting throughout this session. Martina mentioned it's now online. It's super accessible, so please jump in and use it. It's been really good seeing in the chat some of your examples. We've had lots of good examples from participants in the chat. So keep telling us about your projects. You can use that through the usual social media channels using the hashtag UDN Webinars. Maybe we'll feature your story in one of our future webinars. So please take that opportunity. And then we wanted to give you just a few calls to action as we finish up this morning. Maybe invite Martina, actually. Martina, do you want to just pop your mic on and your camera and maybe just talk us through some of these action points, and then I'll ask Sally to tell us about the final webinar in our series.
Sure, Ed. Many thanks. Indeed, I would like to share with you some key messages that then can be also turned into call to action in our daily life. The first point, I think, is that we have seen a truly integrated strategic approach is key to obtain funds and to attract investment. It is important, in fact, to have a strategy, but even more important to build in-house capacity for thinking strategically. And I think that Bilbao and Gothenburg illustrate this point very well. This goes behind financial services and departments, but involves the whole city administration. And this is also why in the handbook you will find hints on funding also in the other chapters, not only in the funding and finance chapter. Then a second point is that indeed there are many funding sources out there, but how to access them? There are various forms of technical assistance that are already available to help your city administration. The case of Athens is a good example of how you can take advantage from the technical assistance offered by the European Investment Bank and other initiatives, but also technical assistance can be provided directly through operational programs. And this leads to the last point I want to make. Local level action and expertise at the local level is key, but indeed managing authorities, in particular in the framework of sustainable urban development, SUD, can make European structural and investment funds and other funding more easy to use. So this is indeed a call also for not only for local authority, but for managing authority to make structural and investment funds more easy to use and so more effective. Thanks.
Great. Thanks a lot, Martina. Thanks to you. Thanks to the other members of our core team who have kept this show on the road today. Thanks especially to all of our speakers. Fantastic input, really high quality presentations. Thanks also to Gwendolyn, our rapporteur. Thanks to all of you in our audience who have been active participants, who've done exactly what we asked you to do. Please keep in touch with us, keep involved in the conversations. I'm going to say goodbye now. I'm going to hand over to Sally, who's just going to tell you what's happening in our final webinar next week.
Thanks, Eddie. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. This is our last webinar taking place next week, next Wednesday, the 25th of November. And we're going to focus on monitoring and how you can measure progress towards your goals in your strategies. We're going to have inputs from Vienna about their smart city strategy, from Bonn, who are going to talk about how to localize the sustainable development goals and align them within a sustainable urban development at city level. And also from Poland, we're going to hear from both the operational program, managing authority, and some of the municipalities about how they've worked together to get the right indicators and monitoring system for their integrated territorial investments. So this is going to be about how to measure, set up a strategic framework for monitoring and keep monitoring as you go when you get into delivery, and how a city can do that in very practical ways, working with the regional level managing authority. So join us for that one, please. Thank you for joining today. Thank you to all the fantastic speakers today. I've really learned a lot and enjoyed it. And thank you for being active on the chat and in our polls. We'll see you next week for the session 6 on monitoring. Thanks a lot and bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us.